We have limited time left, and Tom here will be passing through the audience. If anyone wants to ask a question, I would appreciate it if they would keep it brief.
Did I talk too long? Sorry.
No.
Thanks, Mario. Thanks, Frank.
Tom.
Is it switched on? Hello, can you hear me? Yep. Thank you very much. I found that very interesting. I certainly learnt a lot tonight. And I have to admit that in my naivety and ignorance, I thought the civil rights movement had been initiated by Queen's University students. So that leads me to my question. What role did the students from Queen's University play? And am I correct in saying that People's Democracy was started at Queen's University?
Oh, yeah. Do you want me to answer that? Or?
Go ahead, Mark.
Okay.
You can answer that one.
The October 5th march caused a huge upsurge of feeling. It's a real focusing of the sense of massive injustice within the state. So the first march organised by students was the following Wednesday, and that left the Students' Union at University Road. I was on that march. It was obstructed. We got word as we were moving off that we couldn't go through The idea was to go down through Shaftesbury Square, down to Victoria Street, I believe, or probably down Dublin Road, which was light traffic in the other direction then, and to the front of the City Hall. And it was a Wednesday, so it's half-day shopping and those days. Paisley blocked Shaftesbury Square, and the police therefore wouldn't let us go down through Shaftesbury Square. And then we ended up going down, I think, probably University Street and the Ormo Road, up Ormo Avenue in front of the BBC, and down Linden Street. So it was all pretty dull, about the drabbest route you could have taken. And then we were blocked there, and the police stood in the line, and the students, we just sat down and chanted Craig out and SSRUC. And then, I was there for a couple of hours and went home. Various others, Bernadette and Michael Farrell and others, went back up to the Students' Union, and they formed a protest movement there. Now, I would say that probably wasn't the raw beginnings of it, because I think there were groups of students who had been to Derry for the October March as well, and so the formation of that political cluster was already there in place. But the movement, People's Democracy, was formed by those students on that Wednesday evening, and it became much bigger than NICRA very, very quickly. And I do believe that, and it took executive positions on the NICRA executive, and I do believe that it essentially, it then determined the direction of much of the activity. The Cameron report accused them of calculated martyrdom, of organising protests where they would get attacked and drawing out the RUC. But if the RUC were mug enough to be drawn out, that's a question over their professional standards anyway. But yes, that's where the PD started from. I think it was the 9th of October, and the first march was from the Students' Union down to Linden Street.
Anyone else on the panel want to say something? Go ahead. Yeah.
As far as I can remember, the students had a march. Now, before the PD march, they had a march down the centre of Belfast and a sit-down to protest against the Special Powers Act. And when Craig put a ban on Republican clubs, the students formed a Republican club in Queen's University. And I think that was more or less a civil rights action rather than possibly a commitment to republicanism. But from then on, they did help to swell the ranks of all the protests and marches that we had.
Hello, I'd like to congratulate the panel tonight, because this session tonight was organised very late on the programme. But it was actually a very vital part of the whole programme, because, as was pointed out earlier on, Republicans were very much a part of it, but sometimes washed out as the scenario. But I'm just saying is that how the panel feel now, that I know the Republican movement at the time, which later went into the officials and the rest, how do they feel now that other Republican elements are trying to seize this as a part of their history? You know, that what was being done then in 1968, 69 is now being seized on by a group that did not even exist at the time to justify their own existence or the campaign of 35 years of violence.
Do you want to take that one, Mickey?
Yeah. There's a number of things I wanted in that, and what Malachy said earlier as well about Goulding and Liam McMillan.
When did he become Liam, by the way? Everybody I knew called him Billy.
Well, not there.
He actually was called.
It was Billy, wasn't he?
No, he was called.
He was called
He was
Liam.
president. Anyway.
As I was saying, it was quite clear. I mean, this is not a discussion tonight about subsequent to what happened in Belfast in 1968, 69 in Derry, etc. But for the IRA, one of the key things I hoped I was saying tonight was that there was a decisive shift in thinking, of strategic thinking. It wasn't just tactical thinking. And there is a difference between tactics and strategy. And the strategic thinking effectively was that the political should achieve primacy. And this was not excluding the need for militancy, or even for militarism.
But what do you think?
Sorry, Malachy.
Malachy.
Okay. Well, it's only a question.
Malachy.
Yeah.
Yes, but let it finish.
You know, there's a time and a place, okay? and basically, I think that if you look forward then to the IRA ceasefire, the official IRA ceasefire of 72, it was quite clear that there were divisions certainly within the IRA and within the IRA Army Council, etc., etc. And the divisions weren't simply between those who were traditionalists and those who were taking the revolutionary path. There were divisions also within the revolutionary path. And so it's difficult at this stage, certainly my conversations, and I never had any serious conversations with Goulding, but I did with Cathal Goulding, and with Sean Garland, and I did with other people, including Malachy McGurn and Desi O'Hagan. And there was positions adopted at the time which were not necessarily ones that were favoured by those who took the revolutionary path, etc. And the other thing as well as I think is that the big fear, and what became apparent by 1969, was that civil rights itself was beginning to be overtaken by ethnic sectarian forces, and indeed the emergence of the PDs. I can't name who I was talking to, but someone who was involved in the planning of the long march from Belfast to Derry, and that particular meeting that Malachy referred to, the number of times it took for a decision to be made about having a long march from Belfast to Derry. It was organised under semi-anarchist lines. Meetings would be continuous, and there would be consensus, etc., about certain questions. And there was a decision finally taken when the crowd had dwindled. The motion was put that there would be a march to Belfast, and the second motion was put that the meeting be terminated. And they then adjourned to a certain person's house, and I was told that the discussion that took place was that, look, that route is a contentious one. It's a sectarian route. It seems to be deliberately going through hardline, so-called Protestant/loyalist areas. And this other prominent person said, exactly. Now, what you read into that is entirely up to you, but certainly the sectarian forces were not simply coming from the forces of the state. There were sectarian elements within what was protesting against the sectarian state. But the IRA at that time, certainly the IRA leadership, was not necessarily encouraging that. And I think that's an important statement that has to be made. Otherwise, there's no understanding of the 72 ceasefire.
Tim, I would like to say something.
Yeah, my recollection in the House, I agree with Malachy to some extent that there had been tensions within the Republican movement way before civil rights. I think it probably was from the ceasefire. There was always a little bit of tension. And I think it became evident whenever NICRA executive, those who were very much on the side of a political way forward, were more prominent, and those who were against it kind of didn't participate as much. But I recall my mother talking about whenever the split did come, that those who went to the violent route, if you like, used to turn up at meetings. And they weren't loyalists, they were, as I say, so-called Republicans. And they'd stand at the back of the hall and hackle and shout. And she referred to them as political vandals. They were out to destroy civil rights. They used to be invited to the forward to have their say at the podium, but they never took it. They just tried to disrupt the meetings. So yeah, it's infuriating when the same people try to claim civil rights as their own.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, could I just have we time for one more question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question on the. This has been a debate on why and how republicanism was written out or has been written out of the history of the civil rights movement. But one of the questions that always amazes me is why the victories of the civil rights movement in actually overturning the unfair, voting system, in having in creating an armed police force, in creating the Ombudsman Act in 1971, why those victories have never been claimed properly by the civil rights movement. Because we did have, for 6 months, an unarmed police force. We did have the basis for proper voting within 2 years of the civil rights movement. So how come that the Civil Rights Association, even then and still, doesn't proclaim its victories more loudly? Thanks, Chairman.
Do you want to take that one, Mary? Do you want to take that one? I think part of that was more of a statement than a question. Is there any? Go ahead.
Yes, I just want to ask a question. It really arises out of something that Malachy said, and I would like to hear the views of the other speakers in the panel. It was in relation to when he suggested that Cathal Goulding maybe was in favour of, let Stormont go or whatever. Because my understanding, and I would like to hear the views of the other people, was that in 1972, in March of 1972, when Stormont was actually prorogued, the position of the Republican movement, I don't mean the provisionals, I mean the Republican movement, the Republican clubs, was expressly against the proroguing of Stormont and against direct rule on the basis that there should be a local democracy. And that remained the position of the Republican clubs and the successor, the Workers' Party, right through the 70s and 80s and the call for devolved government. I also think, perhaps, and maybe people would consider this in the context of perhaps what Mickey Donnelly said, and maybe give some comment on it, in relation to the speech, the Carrickmore speech of Tomás McGillen, where he made clear that peace, and this was in the context of civil rights, that peace was a revolutionary demand. So perhaps some of the speakers could answer that.
You want to go ahead, that one, Mary?
Yeah, well, I thought I had tried to respond to that earlier, and I was saying, in fact, that to simply state that elements within the IRA, that particularly Goulding, Garland, Billy McMillan, Liam McMillan, others, etc., were duplicitous in relation to that, I think is a serious misrepresentation of what was going on. There were obviously people, let's put it another way, laggards, in the sense lagging behind that kind of revolutionary thought. But it was quite clear from the early 60s that when I said the replacement, the strategic shift, was that politics became a primary. And the Revolutionary Party is the means of advocating that political change and building a mass movement based on class, not on ethnic identity. They remained unshakable in their commitment to that. There may have been uncertainty as to precisely how indeed it could be achieved. And in that particular context, that's why I referred to 1972, because in 1972, the decision by the leadership, effectively then, to call a ceasefire was itself addressing the role of the primacy of the political over the military. And indeed, the primary objective, as I said, in part of what I addressed there tonight, was creating class unity, particularly within Northern Ireland. And that the radical reform of the sectarian state had to precede that. And indeed, I think it would be important as well to put on the record, I think it was Bob Purdy was one of the first said in his book on civil rights, is that while Roy Johnson may be credited with coming along with the stages theory, etc., Roy Johnson was also quite an Irish nationalist. And indeed, Goulding and Garland and others left him in their wake when it came to developing the Marxist-Leninist critique, and which saw the promoting of hard political movement and the Revolutionary Party model. And so I think that's clear in retrospect, if not at the time. But certainly events take people by surprise. And one comment that I make as well about the Derry March is that the Derry Housing Action Committee, when it promoted that march from the waterside to the diamond, I mean, those of you who are familiar with the sectarian ethnic topography of Derry, the waterside was a redoubt of the Unionist Party. And of course, the diamond was a symbolic centre of the maiden city that had never been taken, as it were, and no Fenian grip was going to get in. And when Craig banned the march, he actually banned the route, not the actual march. And in the classic sense, you march within your own district. And when the Derry Housing Action Committee suggested the route to the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, some of them said to me they were surprised, actually, that the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association leadership didn't understand the significance of the route. It was deliberately designed to attract hostility from the police. And that's what they hoped for. And I'm just saying about your numbers of 380. If everybody that claimed they were in Derry on that day were actually there, you know, the revolution would have been over in 2 days. That's all I can say.
Are we on? Yeah, it's on.
First of all, the idea that you could have class unity brought about by an organisation as small as the Republican movement of that time. I mean, if you were thinking about a century-long programme of growth and development and political action, maybe. But I mean, it was just a fantastically nonsensical idea that you could bring about class unity. So just forget about that. There was, to the minds of some, I don't know how many, undoubtedly, a possibility arose in the spring of '69 that the Stormont government could be brought down. And you have to ask yourself, why did the IRA organise the Battle of the Bogside? Why did they do that? Why, when the Battle of the Bogside had settled down and things had calmed, why did they take up arms in Belfast? Why do they keep talking about it as if some kind of attack on innocent Catholics by the Loyalists and the B Specials, when they, for hours, the IRA and supportive rioters had been trying to burn Hastings Street Police Station and had been armed with pistols and a machine gun on the top of St Comgall's. If this was about peaceful protest at that stage, then that was a very funny way of going about it. So I think we should be a bit more realistic about the history of the IRA and the Republican cause. On the question of whether the provosts have a right to take the credit for the civil rights movement, you know, well, there's a bit of baloney in that, but there's also a simple reality that some of those who became the leaders of the provosts were part of the civil rights movement. Gerry Adams got laughed at for saying he was a founder member of the civil rights movement, which kind of puts it a bit grandly, yes, but he was at the meetings at which executives of the civil rights movement were elected. And other members of the Republican movement and the IRA at that time who went with the provosts were involved at the creation of the civil rights movement. I wouldn't, you know me, some of you anyway, and you know I wouldn't give the provosts the skin off my fart, you know, but still in all, it's not entirely a lie to say that they were there at the beginning.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a few words about the question that was posed, why the civil rights didn't take credit for their achievements. And I think you're quite right. I think two of the biggest achievements for me were the fact that they did bring such a disparate group of people together who had sometimes very little in common and sometimes opposing views, but were in it for the right reasons, to try and bring about social change. That in itself, it was like the first, as I said earlier, it was the first peace process really. What was thwarted by violence. The second thing was that it shone an international light on what was happening here and what the British were doing in the north. Now, there was great advancements in relation to voting rights, to government reform, to housing, to fair employment, and other measures. But we're all, I think here, we have to have everything 100% right. As soon as you say, well, we've got housing, well, it's still as bad. Well, we've got reform in government, well, it's not great. There was great advancements. Some of the setbacks that weren't so hot was that the Special Powers Act was done away with, but then by 1973 the Emergency Provisions Act came in by the Conservative government. The B specials were disbanded, but then we got the UDR. But that wasn't the fault of the NICRA. I think they opened the floodgates for all the changes and led the way to what we have today to try and bring about political change.
Go ahead.
Hello. I'd like to congratulate the speakers on their great efforts to try and do away with some of the mythology and downright lies that have been told in the last 50 years. Regarding the 14th of August and what actually happened, when the provisionals were trying to claim that initially, they were all at an age that they could have been in the school or involved, but they weren't there. So they had to invent a myth that it was the fair and noble men from the 40s that done it. It's done the same with the Belfast curfew. They just took the Falls Road curfew, they took it over and changed the whole thing. Joe Cahill wrote in his book that it was written on the walls along the Falls Road. The IRA stood for I ran away, and that's why he formed the Provisionals. This has been copied in 6 other books by lazy journalists and authors. Do the panel think that it's time that someone who may have contact with the people who were actually involved in the defence of the Lower Falls at that time, that some sort of a statement be issued? I'm not saying that they get up in front of the TV cameras, but some sort of authoritative statement be issued by them on this, the 50th year, to end that mythology.
I do think that if there was graffiti that said I ran away, somebody would have got a picture of it, and I have never seen it, so, and I don't know where it was. I do think you're right, that's part of the myth making of the provisionals. I think the defence of the falls is part of your own myth making.
Just to thank all the panellists. It's very, very good. Researching and all the rest for myself as well. But to add to the analysis, you get a group of people who were pushing peace, peace, peace. And they probably weren't pacifists. They weren't pacifists, but they promoted peace, peace, peace. And it was interpreted as Cardis. And in many ways, it's like Horatius keeping the bridge, while those at front cried back and those behind cried forward. And that's where the Republican movement, in my view, found itself in those very, very difficult times. Very difficult times. But things have to crack. Things have to go. And things did go. I'm not saying that the Republican movement at that particular time were all angels. They weren't. That's nothing to do with it. But the legacy that they have given us, that we can get things without the violence that other people claimed as victories, is in my words, in my mind, monumental. Monumental indeed. But I do thank all the panel for all their comments. They're very good.
We only have the hall to 9 o'clock, so although the... Go on? 9:30. Sorry. So is there any more questions from anyone in the room?
Can I raise a question with you? I have here, I think it's from 1973, a copy of Republican News, the Provisionals newspaper at that time. I'll just read the last paragraph and you can comment on it. By treating with contempt the propaganda of the defeatist and deluded collaborators with fascism and imperialism, the official Republicans, Republican clubs, NICRA and the Communist Party. You can defeat sectarianism by supporting the Republican movement. So very clearly at that time, the provisional movement were anti-civil rights.
Yeah. Again, I'm trying to keep the emotion out of this in my address, and I'm always cognizant of the fact that I was only a teenager then, I was 15 years of age, and I did go on to join the Republican movement. And not clear why, to be honest with you. But it's quite clear that you're talking about two distinctly different periods. We're talking, one of the reasons why I focused tonight on the immediate aftermath of the border campaign, because that is the relevant background to the emergence of a new strategy by the Republican movement then, but particularly by the, let's call it, the Goulding-Garland alliance, if you like, and there were others. But there was a fierce resistance from traditionalists against that movement. And one of the reasons, and indeed Goulding in particular, in broadening out the debate, was broadening out the potential support base for the Republican movement, and to redefine republicanism, to redefine freedom, to try and make it meaningful and relevant to the broad mass of people, and increasingly to talk about it in class terms, in social class terms, and that the issues that were confronting people were issues that were primarily social class ones. And civil rights became integral to that, specifically in relation to Northern Ireland. And again, as I say, there was nothing novel in looking at the civil rights. Civil rights had become an international phenomenon. The Black Civil Rights Movement, etc., the Council for Civil Liberties in Britain, the discovery of race as a problem, etc., in Britain. And there were some attempts to set up National Council for Civil Liberties in Northern Ireland, etc. And they didn't come to very much, and it was the Campaign for Social Justice, I think, in Dungannon that Marion referred to, the McCluskeys, which focused on housing, etc. And perhaps for the first time had what would be a scientific analysis of what was actually happening, not just hearsay, but actually chronicled events, facts, figures, what happened, who it happened to, etc. So there was a plethora of information coming to the fore. And from the Republican movement's perspective, certainly the Goulding and Garland alliance was that this had to be used had to be addressed as a prelude to class unity in Northern Ireland. Now, no one understood fully, and we are all experts in hindsight. 20/20 vision always is great when you're looking back, but it's very, very difficult looking forward to see what will be the consequences of actions. But certainly by the 5th of October marks, and the immediate aftermath of that, the tiny group of people that were advocating civil liberties and seeking change was swallowed up by a whole new influx of people coming from disparate organisations and none, etc. But the Republican movement itself began to be attracting new people coming in, and it was difficult. The resources of the Republican movement at that time were not great. And trying to simultaneously have education. In fact, I remembered of another document, an internal IRA document, the one that allegedly was found on Sean Garland's person by the guards in the south of Ireland, which said the difficulty of training volunteers. It said when for 3 months they have to be taught political and social and economic facts and agitation before they would learn how to fire a gun, etc. So quite clearly the politics was taking primacy over the militarism. But the difficulty with the sudden eruption of violence, etc., is that the entire situation itself was one in a complete vortex. And it really wasn't until the 1972 that Goulding and Garland were able to reassert firmer control over that. And I would respectfully suggest that in doing that, that it indicates a a pre-existing framework, mind frame, etc., that wanted to establish the primacy, not just of politics per se, but of class politics. And I would disagree with what Malachy said. It's not a pipe dream. They never said that class unity would occur as a consequence of civil rights. But they said whatever chance there was for class unity, it could not occur as long as the sectarianism of the state actually existed. And that was a prelude to even beginning the quest for class unity. And that was the essence of what they sought. Beyond that, they could not no more predict than we can today.
But the flaw in your argument is this concept of the eruption of violence as if it was some kind of natural force that just blew in like the wind, when it was the IRA themselves who organised the Battle of the Bogside and organised the battle in Divis Street.
Can I respectfully intervene in that and say,
well,
in fact,
you didn't let me intervene in you.
Okay.
So that's so you lose a point for that. The simple reality is the IRA did
Go ahead and
organise
goals.
those things. The IRA did organise those things. And the question is, why did they organise them? My theory is that they saw a realistic prospect of bringing down Stormont, so they upped the game. They brought the thing to the boil, and I don't hear any refutation of that.
Well,
yet.
can I just say, in respect to Derry, those people who were involved in Derry, in particular, they represented a group that literally became INLA, and in fact, they did not agree with the Goulding-Garland position. And they did not act under instruction from the Army Council or anyone else. They acted unilaterally in that case, and I can say that with pretty good certainty on it. If you want confirmation of it, talk to people like Eamon Malloch and others. Unfortunately, other people are dead now who can confirm that.
Could I say something? I know I'm chairing this, but I was an active member of the Republican movement in 1969, and before that and after it. And I have to totally disagree with Malachy on his perception of what happened in those 3 nights in 1969. The Battle of the Bogside hadn't dissipated. It was still raging. And it was a decision taken to draw the pressure off the Bogside by attacking several post offices and several buildings in the centre of Belfast to take the pressure off the Bogside. And it did do that to a certain degree. The following night, the IRA did not appear on the Falls Road until buildings were burning. And the IRA did not fire any shots until buildings were burning. And the RUC and elements within unionism, I don't think the UDA or the UVF certainly existed at the time, were firing on the Falls Road and burning houses. And that's the true fact, Malachy.
Okay.
My question is, again with hindsight, if the sectarian divisions hadn't been so intense and the rise of both green and orange nationalisms, do you think that we could have had our socialist republic if outside influences hadn't have taken over the situation?
I just think the division is too easily played by malicious forces, I mean, we haven't mentioned Paisley much. I don't think we mentioned it at all. But I mean, when you think of it, the PD march, the first PD march that ended in Linden Hall Street, was blocked by a lunatic who thought that the PD was working on behalf of the Pope. I mean, that was the nonsense that was playing itself within the political frame here. I just do think that the fundamental division in society in Northern Ireland is so deep and so strong that it can be played by malicious forces and can be played again by malicious forces to produce division, and that's the dangerous instability of this place.
In the 30s and the outdoor relief strike, and then civil rights, sectarianism wrecked them, really. And in relation to the Socialist Republic, I wonder if, when I referred earlier on, if there had been an agreement, like the Good Friday Agreement with NICRA and others, and they'd plotted the way forward and there wasn't a sectarian strife where people were coming together for social justice and social issues and seeing that they were equally disadvantaged. They were in relation to housing and education and employment, etc. In working class areas, they were equally disadvantaged. I wonder now that Brexit has raised its head, if things were different, would people start to be thinking, well, you know, this could be a better thing for us if it goes this way. A United Ireland could be a better thing for us. But I agree with Malachy, the sectarian division is still there. We still have segregated areas. We still have the interface barriers. We have segregated schools. We have areas where children don't mix at all. I know it's slightly changed, but I don't know, you look at, my measure is if a boy from, say, St Malachy's went onto the Shankill at 15, would he be safe now? And if a boy from the boys' model went into Ardown, would he be safe now? I don't think so. So it's still there, and no matter what anybody tries to say, and it needs to be addressed. But if it wasn't there, and people were thinking collectively as citizens, perhaps we would get a socialist republic now because of the Brexit scenario. Who knows?
Erskine Holmes. I was there on the Falls Road that night. I was 29 years of age, and I was with Paddy Devlin. I was there as a Labour Party member. I was also there as NICRA. And I have to say, in what I hear said about the analysis of the IRA involvement in the civil rights movement, is very compelling whenever you consider that there is a lot of compelling logic behind the argument that not only did Gerry Adams say that petrol bombs were organised that night for the Falls Road, but Liam McMillan organised petrol bombs that night, and Liam McMillan was a member of the executive of the Civil Rights Association. So to portray the image of the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association as one that was entirely pacifist, peaceful, only concerned with civil rights and not at all concerned with any strategic steps that would lead to a socialist republic, it just isn't tenable as far as I'm concerned. Putting that point to the other members of the panel there. There were 2 men burned that night, almost to death, workers, members of the Fire Brigade Union, Billy White, Dickie Sefton. One of them never really got back to work for a couple of years. His hands were welded together. The fingers of his hands were welded together, and he was very facially disfigured by the whole thing. And there was a lead pipe put through the windscreen of their car, which was clearly marked fire. And 2 petrol bombs followed in there. And the whole account of it is here in Burning Issues, produced by one of the firemen active at that time. There's another book which also recounts the statement made, other firemen, doesn't matter, let the bastards burn. Now, the events that night were the first steps towards the Civil War.
I'd just say, in a general sense, that, and I say this as much as an academic as a political activist, is that when you examine events, when you examine periods of time, you can make 2 broad analyses. You say the general direction of something that goes, but if you look at specific moments, if you like, at episodes, you can see contradictions. And particularly when a situation changes, and what is the expected outcome is superseded by an unexpected outcome. There is always a period of uncertainty before, if you like, the senior leadership can achieve control once again. But in the longer term, and I'm saying in the longer term, we're coming right down into the 70s and the 80s, the fact that the civil rights had thrown up what some people called the pogrom in Belfast, the conflict in Derry, etc. And it was more than that. There were other parts of Northern Ireland which were affected by it. The one consistent thread for the Republican movement that I represent was that it retained a commitment to building a revolutionary party based on class politics and achieving class politics. And if there is any other interpretation, then why the people like Goulding and Garland, people like Malachy McGurran, like Desi O'Hagan, why do they remain committed to that which was formulated in the mid-1960s as a response to the failure of the border campaign? And despite what happened in Derry and in Belfast, they retained a commitment to that vision, a vision of class unity being the objective, not the reality, but the objective. And I mean, I'm not going to go into all the details, etc., about other aspects of Northern Ireland society, but that was a worthwhile objective, and it remains a worthwhile objective to achieve class unity, however difficult that may be. But simply because something is difficult does not mean that it should not be attempted. We do this all the time, and that to me is one of the clear lessons of that particular period, and something that ought to be borne in mind. We can never simply retreat into a collection of episodic memories. We have to look at the broader strategies and the broader movements, what happened, etc. And I think that confirms, I think, the original, the original decision in post 56-62 to take the primacy of politics, in particular class politics. They remain true to that.
Well, let's put it this way then. Mickey got the order to go and attack post offices and start fires. And
didn't say that, Mulligan.
Sorry?
I didn't say that.
Well, sorry, the members of the IRA decided that on the August the 13th and 14th they would burn buildings. Isn't that what you said? You attacked those, right? Were they thinking about the civil rights programme at that time? Were they thinking about the damage that would be done to sectarian relations in Northern Ireland? Were they thinking about a long-term project for peace? I don't believe they were. I think that by April of '69, that project had transparently failed, and another opportunity arose. And I think that they brought the thing to the boil over that. And it's all very well saying that we have this long.
Malachy, any chance of getting a word in here? I'm sitting patiently waiting with this mic to speak.
Could you hold on, Lily? I think Devlin wants to say something on it.
I wasn't on the falls, or I don't recall what happened, but I can recall what happened in the Bone whenever the violence broke out and my mother was still on the executive. The complaint in the area was that we had been Republican leaders, if you like, and people turned to us expecting to be defended. And there wasn't really any arms or anything to defend with, and that had been given up. And my parents were reluctant to turn to any violence. Now, there were, at the mill at the bottom of the street, before the British Army moved into it as a billet, loyalists had taken over it, and there was constant attack from the building into the Bone. And what they did, they didn't shoot back. My father said, well, let's try something different. And during the day, they broke down the door, went in and burnt the place, hoping that it couldn't be used for anything. And they tried their level best not to become engaged in violence, but it was thrust upon them almost. I think that needs to be borne in mind as well. And they didn't revert to violence. They reverted to defence. And there was defence. And it was needed. It was necessary. People were being shot at and burnt out of their homes and being supported by a unionist regime. So it was very unfortunate. But still, my mother and father maintained links with loyalists. And the Gusty Spence quote I gave you, they had maintained links across the UVF and with our neighbours down in Louisa Street and the Lower Old Park, and tried their level best to maintain and to stop a sectarian breakdown. But I can assure you, at that point, any organisation of response was in defence. It wasn't attack.
Could I just say something in response to Malachy? To believe that anyone could have controlled the situation on the Falls Road on that night was foolish. To believe, whether Malachy wants to accept this or not, for the first couple of hours on that night, Republicans on the Falls Road tried to hold the line because they seen where it was going. But it went there. Not because Republic had sent it there, the situation sent it there. The forces of the state sent it there. Young people trying to defend the Falls Road sent it there. In the end, there was no other choice for Republicans to choose defence, as Dimphna said. No other choice. And as far as the fireman goes, yes, I seen that incident. I helped pull the fireman out of the car. But, you know, it wasn't Republicans did that. The fireman came flying down the road in a white car with markings on it, with a blue light flashing, and some kid threw a petrol bomb through the side window and the front window. Now, I'm not condoning it, but it happened in a situation like that. And I thought the fireman was a very brave man to do that. But unfortunately, those two or three kids, young people, that car looked like a police car. Go ahead.
Thank you, Maggie. My name's Lily Kerr, and I'm a member of the Workers' Party. I joined the Republican clubs as a very young trade unionist who was committed to the unity of my class, and I chose the Republican clubs because of their role in the civil rights movement, their commitment to justice, peace, and their Marxist-Leninism. I learned that at an early age, didn't know all about it, but actually that was the reason I joined. It is not a pipe dream, it is something worth fighting for, Malachy. And I have spent the rest of my life in the Workers' Party and all of my working life fighting for the unity of my class. That is a dream and a vision that all of the people that Mickey Donnelly spoke about tonight give me and a generation of young people as well. And that dream's still there, and we still need to fight and hold on to that dream. Our only way forward is the unity of our class. We're socialist, secular, and anti-sectarian. Those were the hallmarks that brought me into the Workers' Party, then the Republican clubs.
I think we have went as far as we can tonight. The debates and the commitment from each of the speakers, they said it how they seen it, and we've had a few difficulties in the memories of that period, which I'm sure is something that's was always going to happen from people having different points of views. So could we end it there tonight? I thank you all for coming. Thank you.